Hi, and welcome to Second Rate Film School. And I'm Andrew, and today we have a very special guest star, Matt Blazi. Welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, so as the title of the video you clicked on already will imply, we're doing a video about the five Blair Witch Project comics done by Oni. And, I figure if I'm going to have someone on, why not have the guy who literally wrote the book about the Blair Witch Project?
Yeah, that was an undertaking, and I'm still sad it's over. I miss living in that world every day.
Exactly, but it's a great book. Highly recommend. We'll drop the Amazon link or wherever link you want it to be in the description below. Highly recommend checking it all out for anyone who's a fan of the Blair Witch Project. Obviously, I mean, I guess if you hate it, don't buy it. But why are you clicking on this video? And yeah, it's just great looking at that film and like the craziness making it. So highly recommend it.
Yeah, even if you don't like it, one of the reasons I wrote it, I said I love independent film, and obviously Blair is a highly independent film that made it big. Why not look at what they did and say, oh, I could go do that? I mean, everyone can be a filmmaker now on their phone. So I was kind of hoping that maybe it would spark some interest in a filmmaker to go out and make their own independent film masterpiece, or at least get their own film done, because I want to see everyone succeed with filmmaking. And this was just kind of my way of giving back, since I've never been able to actually make one myself. I at least wanted to contribute back to those who gave so much enjoyment to the masses and to myself, and it's just kind of what I'm hoping with that.
Yeah. The history of that movie and the making of it is insane. It was the little movie that cost a couple grand to make, and then made $250 million.
Yeah.
When I did my video with Ed talking about it, again, link below. It was crazy when I looked up the box office for that year. It's like you look, there were a lot of big movies in '99, and it's still in the top 10. When you have Phantom Menace, Toy Story 2, and a bunch of other movies coming out, and you can still be in the top 10 for that, that is an amazing
Yeah.
feat.
Yeah,
So
it was Star Wars and Blair Witch in 1999. Those were the two movies that just dominated the pop culture and the box office. And it's one of my favorite years of movies. I love when I'm like, oh, that was made in 99. Oh, that was such a great year. So it kind of endears me to most of the films released that year.
exactly, it was a good year. So, but with a lot of pop culture being generated around it, that includes these comic books. Yes, physical media is not completely dead in my apartment. Picked them up. They're a great read. So, yeah, basically these were printed by Oni Comics. They did five comics, one off one shot, and then four in the Blair Witch Chronicles, which were completely original stories. They had a lot of great talent behind them, including artists Tommy Lee Edwards, Guy Davis, Tom Fowler, and Bernie Merlot, I think is how you pronounce it. I can't find a pronunciation. Yeah, these guys went on to do Batman, Daredevil, Fantastic Four, Hellboy, and tons of others. Jen Van Meter wrote all of them. She would later go on to write for Wolverine, Spider Man, Punisher, The Avengers, Captain America. So it's like these had a lot of talent behind them, and I guess we'll get into talking about them one by one.
Yeah, let's
Yeah.
do it.
So the first off was the one shot standalone, which looked into the already existing stories of Ellie Kedward's origin, Robin Weaver and Coffin Rock, and then finally Rustin Parr. So we eased into just kind of looking at slightly different angles from these already explored stories.
Yeah, so to be honest, when I have not read these since they came out. They've been in their bags and boards for 21, almost 22 years now, and I mean, I bought them because they were Blair Witch. I mean, why not? Adaptations, are usually pretty fun. And these, I had totally forgotten what they were about. I knew they were expanding on the mythology. I couldn't remember the initial standalone one. I was like, what was in this? So it was like reading them for the first time again. And I was surprised by the one just titled The Blair Witch Project, because it did just kind of expand on some of the stories we heard about and Curse of the Blair Witch and the film proper itself. Um, I the What's on the inside cover? It's like a I don't even know, what do you want to call it? A prologue?
Yeah, it's
Or
basically a they had a framing device, which, and we'll get into how that evolved as the
Yeah.
different ones came out, but they are still maintaining the Blair Witch herself, the legend is real.
Yeah.
And this was all based on like self-published comic called Wood Witch Said, written by a
Hmm.
guy who went crazy in the 80s. Which I found like a little weird. I think the typical thing would have been this is based off of a police report, but I guess hey, it's a comic book. Do that.
Yeah, yeah, we'll get into that. I had to read it a few times. I'm like, have I missed something? Because it was like kind of diving back into the world again of the Blair Witch Project. And I read it a couple of times. I'm like, have I always missed this? I was like, I didn't remember anyone saying anything about this. So it took me a minute to I was like, oh, there were, it's world building. And like you said, it takes place in the world as if the Blair Witch was real. And it was interesting, like you said, because we always see stuff based off police reports or one-off stories. So it was a nice, interesting take that I haven't remembered reading, but it was nice.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting because you know the Rust and Parr one I think is like the weakest part of it because they didn't really do much with it. Burkittsville 7 obviously expanded upon the Parr mystery a lot more, so there I don't think they got to tap into. It was under par, in my opinion. Um, but it was still very interesting. But yeah, I mean, with Robin Weaver, we're getting the she was actually the one who did all the killings at Coffin Rock, which was interesting. Seeing down the line, Kyle Brody is implied to have done that in Burkittsville 7. So turning that on the ear from Robin Weaver being like a helpless child to a cold-blooded murderer.
That was probably the biggest surprise I got out of this issue. I was reading it and I was like, oh, I see what they did. That's really neat. And I don't like to consider myself a purist and say if it wasn't said in Curse of the Blair Witch or the dossier, it didn't happen. But I like the fact that it's never been talked about. No one would have suspected a young girl of causing the travesty at Coffin Rock. And that ended up being my favorite story in the issue,
Yeah.
just because it caught me by surprise and I kind of didn't know where it was going. You start reading, I'm like, okay, it's the Robin Weaver story and this, and then she's going to come upon the search party already disemboweled on Coffin Rock. So that was probably the high point of the issue for me.
Yeah. And I like how we also, with the Ellie Kedward, so we're working backwards in it. It was Ellie Kedward, then Robin, then Rustin Parr. They went chronological, but I like the Ellie Kedward because that was always I'm the same way with you. Like I'm not like it has to be a purist. I did like the Robin Weaver story, but I like how we finally got a real deep look into Ellie, and I like how it's from a different perspective that she's almost like she had a curse on her, but the woods were already evil, and it used her as like a giant battery essentially to propagate its evilness further.
Yeah, I did like that she came to America already feeling like she was cursed, and it followed her, and in the witch or whatever the entity is, whatever we want to call it, I guess we'll say witch because we're talking about the first film. Um really is like, oh, there's someone I can manipulate or someone I can attach myself to do what I want. And it ended up making her the scapegoat and
Yeah.
made her basically the, I don't want to say poster child, but it made her the face of whatever evil entity is surrounding, Burkittsville and the former town of Blair and the Black Hills. So that was, again, it was fun to go back and read these as if I read them for the first time, because it shows you how well you can expand a world without changing the foundation of what drew people to it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and it's definitely, I think it reminds me, especially like as we get into these, these are folklore. Like, and this is, I think, what a lot of found footage or movies that try and portray something as really happening fail at, that Blair Witch Project was very successful at, was these are folklore that people remember or tell in different ways. We're skipping ahead a little bit, but in the Offering one, it's like that's what I like about it is like you can ask 10 different people and they'll tell you 10 different versions of what it is because it's a small town. It's like how many times have you heard variations of the hook on the car handle? Like, oh, the kids were dead, or they were perfectly fine, or whatever. That there's multiple variations from town to town. That so it's interesting to see. Okay, well, in this version, Ellie was a pawn who didn't do anything wrong. You know, it was a self fulfilling prophecy of like I got to get away from people because they're gonna think I'm a witch, and but because I got away from people, they think I'm a witch. Versus Curse of the Blair Witch plays it up as, and most other iterations portray it as she was a witch. She's still present. So I thought that was interesting that early on we're looking at what if something else is in the woods before her. Kind of
Yeah,
like Pet Cemetery.
I kind of think that's kind of been expanded on after the film with subsequent movies, and the hunt a killer game. It's really taking it as those woods have always been cursed and no one knows for how long or where it came from, but it picks things, and it all goes back to Ellie, which tends to be the starting point for all of those old stories. And I go back and forth on whether or not I like that. I guess it depends on how it's done, because I was so engrossed in 1999 with, there's this old woman, and she was cast out of the town for being a witch, and she's come back to haunt them. And, it's kind of grown over time that maybe it's the woods themselves, and the woods manifest themselves through a catalyst like an Ellie Kedward or someone to continue whatever its purpose is. Like I said, as long as it's done to where it's not retconning, I guess, to use a comic book term, trying to retcon what Ed and Dan had built with that world with Ben Rock and everything. I think it's a great thing. Like you said, it's a folklore, it's a story, and someone told a story, and it's gone down generations, and things get changed, things get forgotten. And I always felt that these were maybe someone's diary that these stories are based on, or someone heard the legend of Ellie Kedward this way. Well, I heard that she really wasn't a witch and the woods are haunted, and that's just kind of how I approached those stories.
Yeah, no, and I definitely think some people could take umbrage with this because you could say like it technically is retconning if we're supposed to believe that this CC Mavely was directly told by the witch. This is like the true story. So it's like, oh well, the witch is telling her true, or Ellie Kedward is telling her true story. It's like, or the witch could be fucking with her, or he could be fucking crazy. That it's like, even when supposedly stuff is set in stone, we don't know. Like, yeah, again, it could just be we'll get into it with some of these other ones. I feel like they were playing up that the witch was a little bit more of a trickster than what we saw in the original movie. So who knows? Maybe she's just fucking with this poor guy. And it's like, yeah, I was an evil witch, but I'm gonna make it, maybe to draw people in. Like, oh, I'm a sympathetic person. Like lull them into a false sense of security type thing.
Yeah, there's lots of that in this story. It's and like you said, we'll go into it, but yeah, it starts out, everything seems pretty innocent and straightforward, and then it starts to unravel as we get deeper and deeper into each one of these issues, which again, I didn't mind them. I thought a few of those were a lot stronger than the others, and a lot of the stories were more engaging. But I mean, that's with any comic series, and especially when you're dealing with someone's take on a legend that someone else created, you're going to find things you like, and they're going to put their own spin on it.
Exactly, and that's the thing. I don't think any of these are like truly bad comics. It's just like, yeah, they're either really great or just meh, like retellings of the Blair Witch.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing, that even like the worst stuff about this franchise like is still like better than like a lot of other like horror movies or horror content I've seen. It's like, yeah, it's like Book of Shadows isn't that great, but also I've seen a lot worse horror movies out there.
I'm going to take a sip of coffee on that one.
On to the next issue.
The Chronicles episode 1 ends up being about two brothers. One brother is really interested in this girl, Peggy, and she's kind of going out with this, stereotypical jock. And he really wants her, and they decide to go out after hearing that he's basically going to get her drunk and take advantage of her. They want to go scare her. And of course it's in the Black Hills, and they find out where they're going to go and lie to their mom about going to camp. And when they get out there, they scare them and they run away and say, well, we still have to camp. or people are going to suspect something, and they end up coming across their bodies. uh the guy is hung upside down and disemboweled, and they find out that Peggy has been scalped basically. And they decide they're going to run off and join the army. And the one brother changes his mind about staying. They were going to stay, and then he wakes up the next morning, and he goes away. And it's kind of told that the brothers are still together later in life, and they're kind of recounting their stories to, I don't know, a PI or a newspaper reporter or something. And they start talking about all these weird things that are happening. The brother that joins the army, he starts losing teeth, but they're not his. um he starts coughing up bones. And they find a class ring and a locket in the stomach of their mother after she passes. And it's revealed that the one brother that's wearing an eye patch, it's supposedly the witch's eye, and she's using it to see through him, which is why he keeps the eye patch on it. And he ends up like cutting it out and be like handing it to whomever they're talking to. I i was i was intrigued by this. I was like, this is interesting, because it's not a possession story. It's not the witch trying to get revenge. It's like you had said earlier, she's kind of using these guys as a pawn for coming into her woods. So basically, anyone that steps foot in her woods, she's gonna do something to them. It's like she's got a bag of tricks that she kind of keeps handy, and says, well, this is what I'm going to do to these guys.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting one. I think it's my least favorite because there are certain elements that I thought were just like a little weird. I thought a lot of the body horror stuff was starting to become a little gratuitous when you compared to when you have like the first one where it's like very little left to the
Mm-hmm.
imagination. But yeah, I thought it was very. I did find it horrifying the idea that he's seeing like, because he like says like with seeing the eyes, like I can see her, meaning the girl's like death over and over again. Like the witch is fucking with him, forcing him to watch the girl he loved like die over and over again. It's like that's pretty goddamn horrifying. Now,
Yeah.
I did like when it got to the point where he like cuts the eye out like so nonchalantly. And like I love because like I have to put it up on the screen, but like his brother is almost doing like a literal face palm, like he's like my brother here, not like reacting like oh my
It's
god, cut the eye out. But I suppose it could work. That's like you're just so done with the witch ruining your life that this is now just like this is whatever.
Yeah, it's like they've had this secret for 50 years or
Yeah,
more. And yeah, I noticed the facial expression of the brother. He was kind of like, basically, I took it as is like he's finally relieving himself of this burden and trying to show someone that it's real, because no one would believe him.
yeah. Because the framing device with this one is again they're talking to the PI, but they mention it's in the opening page as well. They're like writing a letter saying like listen, we want to tell our story. We know no one's gonna believe it because these filmmakers. So now we've transitioned from the Blair Witch. Everything was completely real to the movie was fake. That they went in the woods and did like a movie about like the equivalent like going about the Jersey Devil, but the Jersey Devil is in fact real. And they're kind of pissed like now no one's gonna believe our story because those kids in the woods. So I thought that was an interesting shift, and you could see these guys are exasperated, but they also at the same time feel now is the time that they can try and tell it that it's
Yeah.
worth a shot.
Yeah, it's almost kind of like they were shooting themselves in the foot, because they're showing all this evidence of murders from 50 years ago, and it all points to them. And that's kind of a device that the witch uses in all the media we've seen. Is she makes it seem as if it's your fault, or you were the one
Yeah,
responsible. So I kind of caught that, and I said, well, that was interesting. But because I know he pulls his eye out and he's like, check the DNA, you'll see it's hers. And I'm like, well, that would be interesting if they had DNA from Peggy back in the day. Um, but again, I interesting take. Um,
yeah,
I like that it was like brothers that had this secret, and it wasn't, we see a lot of stuff. It ends pretty immediately from going into the woods, and they've kind of lived with this for 40, 50 years. So yeah, no, I thought it was a valiant effort. It
yeah,
wasn't my favorite.
yeah. I'm
Um,
I'm torn between this and one of the later ones being my least favorite. They're pretty close. It depends on which day of the week.
yeah.
But yeah, no, I think it good effort, but it to me when I started reading this because I did read them in order, the one
Hmm.
shot them 1 through 4. that I'm like, okay, I'm gonna take a little bit of a break between issue 1 and 2, and then issues 2 and on. I'm like, okay, I gotta read these quickly. So
Yeah, I read them in one shot. I just
yeah,
sat down and read them all back to back, and
overall, like I said at the beginning, it's like even the worst stuff of these is better than like a lot of other stuff. So
mhm.
I still recommend. We'll recommend all of them, but this is still a good recommend as well.
No, I agree.
Issue 2 of the Chronicles line is called The Offering, and I really enjoyed this one. I hinted to it beforehand. I like the framing device is it's multiple people around Burkittsville now like telling you the story of this family, the Price family, who moved there in 1910, and it's very just interesting how you see the different branching paths this story has taken. Sometimes that causes a little confusion because they branch off a little bit too far from each other, I think, but more or less the basic plot is that all the hunters in Burkittsville have a thing where they have to do an offering to the Blair Witch, and whether through arrogance, a mistake, or a prank on the Price family, they do not have an offering given to the witch, and now the witch latches on to fucking with this family throughout the winter of 1910. And you slowly, I love the art in this where you slowly see they're almost becoming like zombie like. They're like starting to smell, they keep having bad luck, and then it ends with, for whatever reason, whatever actually occurs, be it cannibalism, the father goes crazy and kills everyone, they just die or something, they're all dead, and the town just says it was influenza and kind of covers it up to the best they can. And it's just now the family has entered the folklore of you got to give an offering no matter what. When you go in the woods, you got to give an offering. And obviously, we see with the movie, Heather, Josh, and Mike don't do that. So we know what happens when you don't give an offering.
Surprisingly, this was my least favorite.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and I think it had to do with how the issue was put together. Um, the consistent splash pages of each individual folks kind of giving, insight on that. I felt it would have been better to do that in one page or two, and then just tell the story as it went along. And that's a personal preference. I wasn't as engaged with this one, because it was, this family, it was no fault of their own. Someone takes that spool of thread that he left, or someone left as an offering for him because he wasn't going to do it. I don't know. It just didn't stick with me as something that I don't even want to say fit the history that of the town of Burkittsville. I did enjoy, like you said, seeing the family kind of have all of this bad luck throughout the years. I did like the panel of him sitting in church, and he's got a really ratty suit, and he kind of looks, like you said, like very disheveled and gaunt. That's a very good sermon minister, and just kind of like going through the motions because so much has been happening to him, and the town basically shuns them for all of this. Yeah, I think it was the technical execution of the issue that just kind of kept me from getting into it more.
Yeah. And I can see that. It's like I said, there are a couple times where the story diverges too far from people's differing versions. So it works when they say, okay, either, the guy didn't believe in it and refused to put something down, or a kid took it, or he just plumb forgot. The end result is something was not put down
Mm-hmm.
for him. But later on, it's like, I think towards the end, if I'm remembering correctly, and I will admit like some of the technical differences did get to me, where they're going on how they were notified to go to the house. It works. Okay, wolves are like howling outside, or just no one's seen it. But like one of the versions is, well, one of the kids showed up and said, you have to come and see my family. It's like, okay, well then what happened to that kid? Like, how did that kid then
Yeah,
die and
because you
all
would
that?
think if a kid showed up and said you need to come see my family, you would go right away. It was really weird that it was one of those. I In every other iteration of the Blair Witch, they usually stay out of the woods, and they're willing to go into those woods where, I mean, I guess they never really divulged on the townsfolk who've been living in Burkittsville. Do they hunt in those woods? And why aren't there more stories of folks not coming back? Because that would just kind of decimate the population of the town, if they constantly went into the woods and something happened, and every time someone went in, something bad happened. I think it was just those combination that just kind of kept me from enjoying it more.
But yeah, I can completely see that, and yeah, that is going back, an issue I have with it as well is how you said, like, okay, well, why this? Like, so every time you go in the woods, if you don't do this, so there is a little bit of retconning because when we see in the original movie, the way I always took it is when you look at the timeline of things, and they even the one historian says it in Kurt's like, oh, every 70 or so years something happens that I think the original implication was the Blair Witch will leave you alone, but like every couple decades she has to feed, has to cause misery. Versus this is now portraying it as you go into the woods, you get messed
Yeah,
up, and
yeah,
I think that's a symptom of the franchise trying to continue existing. That you can't just then be like, okay, well, you can't go too much further back and have settlers. Okay, maybe you can do Native Americans, but how farther back can you go that? Or now do we have to go 70 years into the future every time you want to do it? So
yeah.
that whole thing of it only happens a few decades has to get thrown out for stuff to continue existing.
Yeah, I think it depends on how far you go in. Are you an outsider? Are you there? What do you believe? Um, yeah, I mean, I always took it as, the town of Blair, when you watch Curse, you got the Bill Barnes, who's the historian. He said, look, this is all the evidence. And he kind of looks at it. It's hard to tell what, does he believe it, or is he just recounting, the stories that have happened? And you're right, it's every 70 years. In the original plotting out of this world building that they did was, it averages out about every 70 years. And maybe that's just the big events that they tie to the Blair Witch that get shared. And there's all these little minor incidents every so many years that kind of flare up, but that people either forgot about or don't talk about, or believe, well, something happened to them, it could have been the Blair Witch, and we'll talk, we'll attach the Blair Witch curse to this family's misfortune. But it's a lot of misfortunes for a small town.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's like, okay, the two brothers in the previous issue, so two teens disappeared in the woods, And again, and I mentioned this when I was talking with like Ed and then Ben as well, that you could also look at it as, at least in the actual original movie, that had they interviewed two other people on the street, we would have heard the Price story, we would have heard the Kearney story. That it's just these are the handful of people. This is their favorite story that the people want to talk about, the Rustin Parr one, because it's like, oh, that's a crazy one, or I want to talk about Robin Weaver, and they have their preferences. And I think as we see with this, like you said, you have the big ones, but then small stuff happens where in the end they cover up the family stuff, saying, "Oh, they all died of influenza."
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that your people might just be retroactively being like, "Oh, well, that family, they did have a lot of bad luck. Maybe it's the Blair Witch and all that." So that people could be ascribing it, and it's one of these things where I think us as the audience, we're supposed to know the witch is real. It's like when I was like saying with the beauty of Burkittsville 7 is it's a straight up documentary about a child murderer and one guy who thinks maybe the one child could have been in on it. I summed it up as this would be like watching a documentary about Son of Sam, but the dog actually did tell him to kill those people. That we're supposed to read between the lines of everything that no, there really is a witch on here. So I think that's what we're illustrating, that officially this family just got the flu and died,
Yeah,
but we know something happened.
well, and like you said, how complicit is the town in perpetuating this myth and covering it up at the same time, because they just said, okay, fluenza. They're like, we need to sweep this one under the rug. This is not a witch. We don't need any more of it. And it was enough for them to kind of say, okay, let's forget this part of our town history and not attribute it to the Blair Witch, because we've already, at that point, there's already been a couple of instances and they didn't want any more, superstition or whatever. Um, yeah, interesting, addition to the history of Burkittsville and in terms of the Blair Witch world. Yeah, so issue 3, I thought was interesting. It's about a coven, and this takes place years before the Blair Witch Project comes out. The head witch of the coven is being interviewed on a TV show, and her coven kind of owns this occult bookstore, however you want to describe it.
It's the bookstore Dan Aykroyd owns in Ghostbusters
That,
too.
I thought of that right away. I thought of it. I was like, raise a cult.
You're the
That
only other
that
person who would make that reference with
Yeah.
me.
No, I mean, and it was funny because it's like when it pulls from the TV and goes to the bookstore and she answers the phone, I was like, this is like raise a cult. I said,
Yeah.
oh, okay. No, I picked that up.
Yeah.
The because of the TV show, this coven is contacted to cleanse a property in Burkittsville by a developer who is looking to sell the property, but I guess believes enough in the legend that they just want to, have enough good juju on their side to sell the house. And the witches kind of question, like, why are we doing this? Is this going to be bad for us? But they decide to take the job. They don't take payment. They donate the money to a battered women's shelter, and they go to the house, and the issue goes into like how they decide what ritual to use, what tools to use, how they approach it. And I believe it's salt. They do a big salt ring around the house while doing incantations and in preparation. And I know in one scene you see a stick figure hanging on the tree that I don't think any of them saw. And they do the ritual and they get this big environmental response that they've never seen before. And as they don't sleep in the house, they tend to they choose to sleep outside. And the one of the witches has a dream of being taken over by a mob, and they're wearing old time clothing, and they wake up and they're like, we need to get out of here. And it progresses to show that over the years, each one of those folks is oft basically in weird accidents, whether it's hitting a deer, freezing to death in a blizzard, cancer, until we're left with one witch who basically encircles herself inside her home, using these rituals to hopefully keep her safe. And the last panel pulls out, which I thought was really nice. It shows the circle, and she's got everything food and whatever inside the circle because she's the last one. I liked this one.
Yeah. Same.
I thought it was a really interesting take to pull in the Wiccan religion and the effects that the Blair Witch would have on them, because I know at one point they showed two of the witches watching the news, and it's about the disappearance of Heather, Mike, and Josh, and how it affected them. So I didn't know where it was going, but it kind of uses the same thing where stuff happens years later, kind of back to the first issue with the brothers. And I thought that they were what ended up being that dream sequence when the mob comes out of the woods. I half expected them to be like kind of teleported back in time.
Yeah.
And these villagers, the people of Burkittsville or Blair, whatever it would have been, saw them as witches because they were, maybe their car got transported, or because of the clothes they were wearing or how they talked. I thought that's where they were going with it, and then it was just a dream. And I was like, oh, I want to read that one.
Yeah.
I kind of wanted to see that, but no, I enjoyed this one.
Yeah, this was my personal favorite, actually. I really liked the whole idea of, like, this is the only time we've really ever seen anyone nearing what we would imagine as the level of, like, what's in there going, and they just utterly get their asses kicked just as quickly as anyone else. It's like, I use the analogy, this is like watching War of the Worlds, and you, like, see like the military go in and immediately get their asses kicked, and it's like, oh my god, like that's a horrifying concept. I love the art in this one. Tom Fuller does a great job. I love, like you said, in the last panel or page where she's got everything in the circle, but I love how, like, she's inadvertently creating like the stick man, like with her shadow, and it just shows it's within the within the circle, that's like she can't escape it, like that, it's already within that, it's only a matter of time. And yeah, I found it just very interesting, the idea that, because, and let me get your opinion on this. So yeah, they're obviously lured in with the idea of, hey, can you come and cleanse this house? I like the fact we don't know what the hell happened to this house. That's really damaged. There's a lot of fucked up shit. We don't know what went on there. It's never explained. I like that. It's just like, again, goes back to the town just covers this shit up, and whatnot. But the guy who hires them disappears, like he's not a real person, and his name is Edward Kelly, which I think is like supposed to mean Kelly
Kelly
Edward,
Edward.
which but I find it really weird, and they do that in the next one to get ahead, where the person name is named Edwards, and I'm like I think they watched like Son of Dracula or Monster Squad a little too much with Doctor Alucard or Doctor Acula or
Yeah.
Alucard, um, and but I just thought it was so weird because fine, the Blair Witch lures him in. I think it's a little weird that like she's dialing. I can imagine. Okay, fine, she can conjure up that she can call a phone number. I'll believe that. I find it hilarious that the phone's ringing and she's like, "Oh shit, I didn't come up with a name. Edward Kelly. Okay, it comes up with it in the last minute, but." I love the fact that they get the payment is sent to the battered women's shelter. I'm like, so wait, she has money that she can somehow send in, and that was just something I kept rereading it, thinking like, wait, what am I missing here? Because why would the Blair Witch give money? And then I'm like thinking, okay, is it because it's a battered women's shelter that she empathizes with it? But she does kill a lot of women who've done nothing wrong. So that was just like the most bizarre part of me that I laid awake at night thinking about that, just staring at the ceiling.
Well, I took it as she had someone do that. She kind of, I don't want to say possessed, but she influenced someone to pick up the phone. Your name is Edward Kelly. I need you to do this. You're going to have them, you're going to send the money to a battered women's shelter. So I think she was moving through someone who didn't know it, which is why there
Okay,
was
maybe.
no realtor named that in Maryland. That was my interpretation of how that happened. Um,
Yeah.
but I mean, that doesn't mean that, as a spirit, ghost, demon, or whatever, she wouldn't be aware of technology and seeing how it works
Yeah.
and having that foresight to use a telephone. But I think she used someone.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I can go either way, whether she did it or possessed someone or whatever. But I just found it funny when I was reading it that she's gonna murder all these people, but she follows through on her deal. She's not gonna screw them on payment. She's gonna give them cancer and make sure they all die, but they're getting their payment.
Yeah.
Um, but no, I just like this one because, like I said, it's like this is the first time we've, in theory, seen people not go into the woods woefully unprepared. Everyone else, like as we've seen in all these comics, goes in not believing the legend or whatever, or thinking they know better, and then they get their asses kicked. And it's like you think like, okay, maybe are they going to do this? And I think she lured them in because the way the interpretation I got was she knew they were in her orbit. Like, they had never heard of Burkittsville and didn't really know of this, but like she was a little worried, like, hey, these powerful people are kind of nearby. I gotta get rid of them before they create a problem for me down the
Mm-hmm.
line. And that there also might be some jealousy on if we're taking in the one shot into account that there might be a little jealousy on Ellie's part that she's like, I'm not even a fucking witch and I get murdered, but these people actually are and they get to go on TV and everything's fine with them. No, screw them. I'm taking them out.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and a lot of folks don't look at it as like Ellie kind of evolves. If she's such a presence, then she's got to be seeing what's happening, in the town of Burkittsville throughout the years to kind of coordinate her efforts to get people in using, technology. It'd be like all of a sudden her showing up on Zoom and, as a guest and, just like I said, evolving her techniques. And yeah, like you said, she wasn't a witch, at least in depending on the interpretation. Was she a witch or wasn't she a witch? If she takes it, well, I wasn't a witch, and now you folks think I am, and you're bringing witches in. Well, I'm just going to do my thing.
Yeah.
But I like this one. I liked how she offed them over the years in little accidents, and it's almost like it wouldn't even show up on the town radar because it doesn't technically happen in Burkittsville, and it happened so many years later, and it's almost like no one knew this was happening anyway. I actually, when they pull up to the house, I was wondering, I was like,
Yeah.
this would be a really neat tie into the previous episode if it was, or issue, if it was the Price house. And I was wondering if it was like the same layout. I referenced back to the
Yeah.
second issue. I was like, I wonder if it looks the same, because I thought that would have been pretty neat. But I think that their house was more in town, and this one was kind of like on the edges of the woods.
Yeah. So that definitely, I didn't think
Mm-hmm.
about that, but that would have been a good way to tie them
Yeah.
together, even though these are in theory supposed to be 100% standalone. And in thinking back, I'd have to look. I don't even think it could be the Kearney brothers' house too,
Yeah,
because that
yeah.
was more of like a
No,
farmhouse, if I'm
I
remembering
would.
correctly.
I'm happy with it either way. It was an enjoyable read, using
Yeah,
modern witchcraft to cleanse a house, but it drew them to her. Um, but I just yeah, and it was that was probably the only part that was a disconnect for me is she calls up this coven years before they aren't in Burkittsville, and she brings them to a house there. So was she bored? Did she just want to cause mischief to add to her legacy? They weren't Burkittsville residents. They weren't seemingly close. They were in Maryland, but
yeah,
maybe it was her appearance on the TV, talking about witchcraft and all that stuff. But that was the only thing that was the only kind of disconnect that I saw with why them.
yeah. I took it like I said, earlier that they do these cleansing rituals to get rid of evil. That it was on her radar. It's like
Mm-hmm.
they're not going to be a problem because how quickly she dispatches them. But she's like, I want to take them out just in case to be the self-preservation. Now, yeah, they even say like they've
Yeah.
never done something this big, so it's like they can't. I can't imagine them going out. Like how much salt would you need to encircle the entire forest, even if they were able to do it? But it felt like her just kind of like taking out any competition or any threats to her power. That's just like, okay, I gotta
Yeah.
do this
Yeah, I
every
mean
now
that's a
and
good way
then
to
to
look
make
at it.
sure I'm
I was
safe.
like, well, how would she know about them if she's kind of contained to the Black Hills? Unless she saw someone watching it on, you could
Yeah,
go down that rabbit hole, pretty deep as like, well, she saw someone watching this TV show from the window in Burkittsville and this and that. I didn't want to think too much of it. I just enjoyed the story. I just thought it was a nice spin on some of
yeah,
the stories that, ended up
yeah,
being in this universe.
exactly. So, yeah, like I said, it's my personal favorite, and I think we've probably I would have to look at, but probably talk the most of this positive and just like
Yeah.
any real nitpick we have is just like the how did she find out, but the rest of it is solid enough that's like if that's the only issue that is with this issue,
Yeah, and
that
I think it's just
that's
human
a
nature
pretty
to
damn
find
good
out,
story
like,
then.
well, how did this make sense? But we're okay with a witch being real. But how did she know someone outside of town was, when we watch certain movies,
Yeah,
it's like you're okay with werewolves, but not werewolves doing this, or something else. It's like we kind of can't just sit back and enjoy it. We want to dig a little
exactly.
deeper, but
Yeah, well, it's like when people have problems with like Superman's powers. It's like, well, Superman can't do that. It's like, well, Superman can't do anything. He's a fictional character, so it's like, but yeah, well, and then going on to the final issue, issue four, Fire. The framing device is Nathaniel Burkett is a little distressed by the fact that priests and clergy in the town keep getting chased out. That there's something going on. The churches keep getting burned down. So finally, at his wits' end, he sends Reverend Matthew Edwards to the town. And he's a old style, very much fire and brimstone, preacher, very theatrical almost. So he's sent to the town and he is determined. He's like, I'm going to teach you all. There's nothing to fear out there. You're not going to chase me away. I'm not going to give up. He's like, a stern, like stubborn guy. He's making it his mission to prove there's no Blair Witch and all that. So they rebuild the church. Weird shit occasionally happens. So he's like, I'm not giving up. He's like, you know what? We're all going to go into the woods now. And he starts giving a sermon, and we start seeing that the townsfolk are now seeing the sermon as something being twisted and evil. And that now they assume he is what's the evil that's come to town, and he is dispatched much like Ellie Kedward ends with Nathaniel Burkett doesn't know any of this. Like we see it, but he and no one else is aware of it, from what I understand or how I took it. And a new preacher is sent, and life continues on. I thought it was good. I think it's the second weakest in my opinion. Like it ties for me with the first one, because my main problem with it is it makes the town complicit, or not even complicit, like actively taking part in this stuff now. That they're the one who's now actively killing this guy, and I get the implication is they're the ones burning down the churches, various churches. Now that is interesting that she can control the town. I thought maybe this is going back to the whole previous issue with the Wiccans, that the evil in the forest is a little concerned with this guy, that like maybe, hey, you're going to convince people that I'm not a problem, that I can't feed off of them, that's the reason why the town is then, stirred up, that this is a one-off example. Interesting. I like the artwork in it. But yeah, I just thought it was a little weird with the like town, like how much involvement they now have. Going from we hear the story, we know of it, to we're active participants in perpetuating it now.
I no, I get that. This is one of my favorite ones. Kind of, it's kind of funny. I took it as the witch is influencing the town to burn the church, but they don't know it.
Yeah.
And when he comes in, he's building the church, he's putting the word of God into this town. He gets the church built in 4 months. I really did enjoy the turn at the end where he goes into the woods and he's doing the sermon. All of a sudden, the town is being influenced by her to see him as a demon or as someone bad, and she probably sees Reverend Matthews as a threat to get the town to stop believing in the ghost stories and what had happened in the past. When they basically tie him to the tree and give him the Ellie Kedward treatment. I enjoyed that because it seems at the end that they don't know what they
Yeah,
did.
I couldn't tell, so
I think they took it as they didn't know, because that would be, like you said, if the whole town was complicit, it kind of puts a damper on the rest of the mythology, that the town kind of knew this was happening and some people were influenced and they keep covering it up. I think she was using some sort of influence or magic, whatever you want to call it, to make this priest look that way, and she kind of put them under a spell. And we don't get really any follow-up about how the town dealt with Reverend Matthews' disappearance. They just kind of welcome this new preacher in at the end, and they all start going into church and the church is still standing. It would have been neat for them to have a line, about, well, he left. He left us. I think that would have tied it in a little bit more, to be a little bit more clear that the town wasn't knowingly doing, without the town knowing, they knew what they were doing. Let me put it that way, if that makes sense.
yeah, and that's the thing. That's why I keep going back and forth, because we see clearly that they are being influenced to see him as evil. So I wasn't sure as she just every now and then will influence however many that she needs to burn it down, but they're aware of it. Because yeah, you're right. In the last pages, they just like welcome the new guy, and it's like I was curious as to why. Now the implication is this is the Reverend that finally stuck. That you don't, now the story is over. You don't hear about anything else burning down. And I think what would have fixed most of my issues is if they didn't have a series of reverends leave, that he's just the reverend that's being sent to the town, that there's never been a reverend before, like that, like this is the early days of Burkittsville, like being resettled, formerly Blair, that this is now the first time that Ellie has to deal with someone coming in and actively being like, no, you're not gonna do this anymore. That's why she sees the threat, and like this is the one time occurrence, and then everyone's mind is blank, that you're right, had they been like, he just disappeared on us or whatever, that, and then the new priest comes in, or reverend, or whatever term we want to use, comes in, and it's just a whatever, we'll deal with the ghost stories or whatever, but like isn't now a threat to Ellie and the woods and all that. So I think I definitely like it. Like I said, I don't hate any of these. It's just this one felt a little bit like the Kearney one. We're not like really sure how to pin down like what we want to do with this one, like 100%. Like they had the idea, priest goes in the woods, and all that, but didn't have it fleshed out completely.
Yeah, and I took it as, any sort of town or settlement would have a priest or minister or preacher kind of with them. It doesn't seem like, that you establish a town and you don't have someone there for
Yeah.
worship. So I figured that's how I read into it, is that, Burkett, got the town settled, and every time they get a church built or they start to build it, it goes away, it gets burned down, and the preacher leaves and he's finally had it. That's how I read into it.
Yeah.
But I think it would have been just fine if that was the start of the town, and they're trying to get this town established, and this is the first preacher that comes in, and he's like, I know this preacher, we're going to bring him in, he's going to help build our church. And maybe if stuff happened, I didn't really have an issue with this issue, no pun intended, again using the word issue a lot. uh no, I it was interesting. i
Yeah.
i i my favorite part was that she kind of took over the townsfolk and turned it on the preacher because he was such a threat. And then it was kind of ambiguous at the end. It's like, did they know what they were doing? Or are they covering it up?
Yeah.
I like the ambiguity of that. And I think that's why it was this one with the Coven one were my two favorites
Yeah.
to read.
Yeah, and I like the idea. Like it, I think they need to have a maybe smaller part of the town involved. Like I don't know how they would have justified him only taking like 5 people out to the woods or whatever, but that's where like you said, it taints a little bit. That's like, okay, the town, or at least this generation of the town, was active participants in killing people. Versus we've seen the other ones where they're like, we just want to keep this shit quiet. That he should have, I think, been the first, because I'm also confused at the end. Why is there the implication that now the church is fine? Like, we don't hear in any other stories afterwards that any other churches have been burned down. That it's just like, why did we have this problem for so long with several other reverends? Then we had the main reverend who, like, dug his heels in and she had to kill to get rid of.
Maybe
But
it's
then the
because he
next
was
guy's
that
fine.
type of preacher. Maybe,
Well, I can understand her killing him. I
yeah,
justified that she wants the religious presence out. She keeps chasing the other ones away. He digs his heels in and she's like, okay, well, we're gonna have to play hardball now. It's just weird to me that then the implication is the problem is now solved. That the next reverend, it's finally sticks. Where I think it should have been, he's the first one to come in, and then like a more apathetic, less fire and brimstone preacher comes in, and then she's
hmm
fine with him.
yeah,
So
he's not trying to change the perception of the Blair Witch. And maybe she did something to the townsfolk where it's not so concerning to them, so they don't really bring it up to him.
yeah,
And she'll step in if she has to, but yeah, it's everyone's interpretation of this world is vastly different on how they take the occurrences that happened in Blair and Burkittsville over the 300 years or so, since it all started. um yeah, it's just what story resonates with each of us as the reader or the consumer. um I think I enjoy the stories that take place, in the town back in the day more than the modern approaches,
yeah,
except the Coven one
yeah,
I
exactly.
liked. Yeah, like you said, the one with the brothers, I didn't, it was good, but I didn't really enjoy it that much. I like the older time stuff because it kind of, to me, that's where it's most effective.
Yeah,
And a lot of those stories about the Blair Witch, from what we learned from 1999, there was only one occurrence in the 1900s, in the 20th century, up until Heather, Mike, and Josh. And I think it's because people were less dismissive in the olden days. They were more apt to believe there was a witch, and everyone, that they really interviewed in the movie, minus, like the fisherman and obviously the mom in the movie, didn't really believe it, because modern way of thinking is just, oh, that's an old witch tale, or that's an old
yeah,
folklore. But when you see the folks that are living it, and where it seemed to be she was more active because they believed in her,
yeah.
I always like those stories more.
Overall, I guess moving into just conclusions on this, I thought these were, I think some of the best, like outside of the main canon, that wasn't sanctioned by, Ed and Greg and, Ben and all of like the inner circle. That this marked kind of the demarcation point as, yeah, we give you our blessing on this, but like you hear that like their involvement bleeds off, as we go along, to the point where it's like, okay, we're making this and like, hey, we're putting the Blair Witch name on it, but like it's not given the same level of intensity and thought into it. So I think this is a good, you know, aspect of people who were in no way connected to the making of the original movie or Curse or Burkittsville 7, etc., can still tell very good stories with the Blair Witch mythology, and you can create really great stories. You know, sometimes they're not perfect, but even the bad ones are still have some level of interesting things to talk about.
Yeah, I enjoy someone who wants to take some care in telling a story like this. And like you said, it wasn't one of those, well, we're going to create the story and we're just going to slap a label on it, which they do with a lot of stuff anymore. And it's like, it's kind of what my problem was with the Blair Witch video game that came out.
Yeah.
To me, it always felt like, well, they had this great concept and they backed into it being a Blair Witch story because there wasn't enough Blair Witching in it for me up until the end. It was kind of like they kind of got halfway through and was like, oh, this could totally be a Blair Witch game.
Yeah.
And I could be totally wrong. It's just my interpretation of it.
That's how I felt with it too.
You know, it felt like they had this great idea, this concept, and then someone was like, well, why don't we just do Blair Witch? And they're like, great idea. And they, you know, they throw up a Burkittsville sign and they get to the end and it's in this house. um I enjoy when folks kind of take care, and it does, you know, these were written and made the year the film came out. Like they came out probably the month the film came out. So you didn't have a lot of folks trying to put their own spin on it, They were playing in that sandbox that Ed and Dan and Haxon had created without really probably seeing the film. You know, they probably saw enough to create these. I wouldn't mind more comics taking place in the world of the Blair Witch in, you know, miniseries form, 6 to 10 issues or whatever it is, just to kind of flesh some of these stories out. Because I think being told in one issue kind of leaves a lot on the table.
Yeah.
You know, especially, you know, a lot of the stuff like with the Coven takes place, you know, kind of in the middle. You know, less than a third of the issue kind of takes place, you know, in Burkittsville and everything. And I'd like to see more of that stuff where maybe more things happen over that night.
Yeah,
You know,
exactly. And for the record, I just looked at my copy of issue 4. It says publication date July of 2000. So
okay.
yeah,
Okay. I thought I saw it said July of 99, so I could have been wrong.
it could have been one of the earlier issues.
Oh,
But
you know
yeah,
what? It might have been the first one.
yeah,
The just the aptly titled Blair Witch Project that probably came out in 99 and these came out in 2000.
yeah. I mean, they all have ads for, or at least my versions do. I don't know if they're all. Maybe I don't have the first printing. But like it has ads for it, just but it says for the second one, but it doesn't have Book of Shadows, doesn't have the poster. It just says BW2.
Yes, I did. You're right. I did see some of that. Yeah, so that would
So it is still early on.
and I did see. I think it might have been the first issue, the Blair Witch Project one. I saw an ad for Stir of Echoes, which had come out in the summer of '99. So this must have been the one that I was looking at, and I must have equated them all. Yeah, it says Book of Stir of Echoes, and the Ninth Gate, Winter '99. So this was the one that I read first, obviously, and it came out in July of '99. So then I must have just equated that with the series of stuff for when the film came out.
But you know, even to your point, still though, you know, these had to have been printed, you know, July of 2000. But it's like they wrote these, you know, several months before to then get the art done, get the printing done. So, you know, the phenomenon was still blooming as they were writing. So it's, I think, some of the purest expanded canon we will ever get because it was still written at a time where it's like we don't know the potential of this series. It doesn't have, we don't have the reverence for it now, where like with the video game where we put like, okay, let's just slap Blair Witch on a game that takes place in the haunted woods. It's like, no, we have to craft a good story. And again, I love the artwork and even like the covers. They're all images from the movie.
Pretty much. And I always enjoyed that out of them.
Yeah.
Is, you know, they didn't try to, you know, tell you what was inside. I think the cover of #1 is my favorite because it's got Chewbacca on it.
Yeah.
That's just always been one of my absolute favorite scenes. But then I do enjoy the third one because it's kind of taking a picture from inside the house. Yeah. And just that blue coloring on it, I always enjoyed that. But the first one's always been my favorite.
Yeah, it's great. You know, love Blair Witch in general. Obviously, we both do. So this has been great look into it. Fortunately, not a lot of other love with Blair Witch in comics. Yeah, I would have loved to see this Chronicles line, like you said, continue on. Maybe we do like a couple, issue mini arc to do like the Coven episodes stretch out, or just like each month or however often they release them is just a new one shot story, and just like these are the different stories you can do with Blair Witch Project.
Yeah, it would be nice to see that happen, a couple issues every couple of years, just diving back into it just to kind of keep it fresh. I think, we've said before, and I know I've said it, I think Blair Witch would live on in different media, more so than a movie or maybe a mini series, and trying it out in this day and age with comics or an app or something. Someone, Lionsgate decides, okay, we're going to make an immersive Blair Witch app where maybe it's a game, when you read files, kind of like this hunter killer game that comes out, but it's on an app, and just different spins on it. I think there's room to expand the mythology or tell stories within that world without contradicting the world that Haxon created, because I think they did such a good job that it's kind of led to some of these other, like the young adult novels that had come out, which I have all, but man, I haven't read them in forever. um so that kind of stuff I enjoy, probably more so than I ever would being excited about another film.
So there you have it. A very long look into these comics that not many people remember, but they really should. Pick it up. I picked mine copies off of eBay a couple years ago for I think like $20 total. So you can get them for a reasonably good price. Thanks again to Matt Blazi for coming on. Check out his book. The link will be in the description below. And again, thank you for coming on.
No, thank you for having me. This was a fun dive into, an area of the Blair Witch that I don't get into a lot. So it was just kind of nice to dive back into that world and see some new old stuff. And I'll never turn down the opportunity to talk more Blair Witch with folks.